Okay, there's only one slide on my background. It has one image. But I did want to just explain where I come from because a lot of people don't understand. I don't think I understood it for the first 6 months. But the Great Lakes Forest Fire Compact submitted a grant to state and private forestry for this land fire coordinator position. And the goals of the position is to work with all 20 states in this U.S. Forest Service Region 9. So I am based in Madison, Wisconsin. I sit at the Wisconsin DNR, but I'm federally funded. And my job is to help all of you throughout this entire region get better data, use the data better, understand it better. And so I can talk about that forever, but I'm going to get into today what I'm actually going to talk about. I'm going to tone it down a bit and just focus on one thing. So just for this talk, I'm going to talk about what LANDFIRE is and what it isn't, how LANDFIRE can be used for fire management at a landscape scale, why there's a need for local data editing instead of just downloading the LANDFIRE data from online and using it that way, and tools that you can use for editing, and as well as showing an example from our region where they've done this work. So I think most people in the room know what LANDFIRE is, but just in case they don't, it's a partnership between the Department of Interior, the U.S. Forest Service, and the Nature Conservancy aimed to characterize fire, fuels, and vegetation conditions across the country. Most of LANDFIRE's data products are raster data sets that look kind of like this with the 30-meter pixels like a lot of other people have been talking about today. They also produce these state transition models that can model disturbance and through succession classes in an ecosystem. And so for those data products that are the raster grids, there's several of them. They can be categorized under disturbance, vegetation, fuels, and fire regimes. So definitely not enough time to talk about all of these things today. When we're talking about fire, generally, we're most concerned with the fuels data sets. That's what people are using in their fire behavior modeling. And so, but I have all those other data sets circled because the fuel model data set relies on all of those. So we're actually going to talk a little bit about some of those as we go through. And this is just a schematic that shows why the fuels mapping relies on all these other data sets. So don't get too into the weeds, and this is a really overview slide of how LANDFIRE produces their data. But I just want you to note that the beginning modeling starts with input data and this modeling that occurs to create these vegetation layers. And once that is done, then that's when the fuel mapping is created. And that's all based on tabular relationships or rule sets between existing vegetation types and fuel models that are assigned by the experts, which we'll talk more about. And just like Joel said, see Joel, at the beginning of his talk, I just want to give the warning that many models are wrong, but some are useful. I won't say it in the words that he said, but this is how I like to say it. So what we're showing there is some of the LANDFIRE data sets overlaid on top of a real landscape, and you can see how these 30-meter grid pixels are not going to be able to capture all of the specificity and changing landscape on the ground. So in LANDFIRE, so when you're working with 30-meter grids, you're already simplifying a complicated landscape into one value in a 30-meter pixel. But on top of that, LANDFIRE is a natural mapping program, and it's meant to be used at the landscape scale. So you're not supposed to be zooming in and looking into one or a few pixels and saying, this is wrong, this is mapped wrong right here. It's more of a landscape scale. The trends in the vegetation and fuels should be consistent throughout a larger landscape.
We have to update Windows 10, I'm sorry.
We'll be back in 2 hours.
It's yesterday, too.
Yep. That's okay. So as I said, when we're talking about fire, the most relevant data set in LANDFIRE is the fuel models. and I'm sure most of you know what these are, but just in case, a fire behavior fuel model is a set of fuel bed characteristics under a set of fuel types. And what I'm showing here is the Scott & Bergen 40 fire behavior fuel models with all of their model parameters. Not to look at every single one, but just to know that these are models again, and they're based on this set of conditions. That's not completely accurately what's going on the ground, but it can give an idea, it gives us something to model and to check against what's going on in reality. So with these models, typically in the US, people have been using the Anderson 13 and moving towards the Scott & Bergen 40 more detailed models, but I definitely know some people who are stuck on the 13 and think that they're better. Anyone? Raise your hand. No? Okay. I won't tell you who said that. And so for these fuel model data sets, again, they're based on tabular rule sets, based on a combination of different vegetation types, cover and height. They assign a fuel model. And the rule sets are consistent between a map zone. And so I'm showing the LANDFIRE map zones on this map over here. So where we are now, this map zone is all of Maine plus almost all of New Hampshire. And for Massachusetts, you have kind of half of Vermont and probably all of Connecticut and Rhode Island, but I can't really see it. So there's these very large areas, and the way, I know a lot of you know and were involved in this process, but the way that they came up with the fuel model rule sets was by getting experts from these areas, sitting them down in a room, and going over what do they see on the ground in terms of fire behavior, and how can we map the fuel models in this region to be consistent with that. And there's a whole host of issues with that, but I won't get into it. So for these rule sets, for a data geek like me, which most of you are probably not, but you can download a database of all the rule sets from every map zone in the entire country into an Access database and look at every combination of veg types and everything and what they're assigning to a fuel model. But an easier way to do this is with the LANDFIRE Total Fuels Change tool. This is an ArcGIS tool add-in, and once you load in all of the required layers, which is disturbance, existing veg type, cover and height, and elevation slope aspect, and biophysical settings, then you can open up this interface where it shows the rule sets for the current EBT that you're looking at. So there's a drop-down menu here. You go to any existing veg type that you want, and it pulls up all the rules. And this is really helpful because the rules are in the full database are coded as numbers. So GR3 is 103, which is hard to go back and forth between those. But in here you have the actual values of what you would be interested in looking at. So that says like TU1, TU2. I'll get more back into that later. But just to explain again kind of why we're looking at the fuel model data set in terms of fire management is because it's one of 8 layers, which can all come from LANDFIRE, that go into a landscape file. And a landscape file is necessary for several fire behavior modeling programs such as FlamMap, FS Pro, and Farsight. And each layer, each of these 8, has a different influence on fire behavior. And what we're really going to be focusing on today is the fire behavior fuel model, and that influences surface fire, spread rate, and intensity. The example of the data critique that I'm going to give, they actually did some canopy height and cover adjustments, but I won't be getting too into that today. So, the need for local calibration. So, LANDFIRE says this over and over and over. When you're going to use, any GIS data set, especially based off of models, which all of them really are in some way, you need to really look at the data and make sure that it makes sense in your area. I'll show, so this document, Modifying LANDFIRE Geospatial Data for Local Applications, is an amazing guide. It's really long, it looks really scary at first, but it goes through every single LANDFIRE data set, a little bit about the background so you understand what it is, and then why you might want to modify it, and then how to do so. And it is great. And Corey Blankenship and Don Helmbrecht are masters at this. I pulled a few images from their document. So this one on the left is showing the difference in positional accuracy. So when you're further zoomed into an area like this coastline, you're going to see these gridded pixels there because you're so zoomed in, and so it's not as precise. But when you zoom out, you can't see that anymore. That's that box down there. But that's not the only thing that's happening when we're going from a larger scale to a small scale, or anything with LANDFIRE. So there's also changes in, I call it, in themes or thematic mapping. So this is showing a map zone seam line, and this is actually existing vegetation type. So based on their vegetation models, they came up with a completely different type on this side of the border than this side of the border, which is completely artificial. It's not gonna, the vegetation is not changing right there along that arbitrary line. So you will see differences between map zones, and your landscape might match the modeling better for a different map zone than the one that it's actually in. So just thinking about things like this. And when this happens, your resulting fuel model assignments will be very different on either side of the map zone. And even if you have the same vegetation on both sides here, you can end up with a completely different fuel model data set or data values on the other side of this border just because of how they assigned the fuel models. So I'm going to be talking about a data critique and fuel calibration in the Huron-Manistee National Forest. I know that's not that close to here, but it's technically in the Northeast region. But I'm showing Don Helmbrecht's work that he did there, and he has done a really good presentation on this, and so if you're interested in this, I really encourage you to look at his slides. I know that you can't get that link right now, but I can send it to you, or watch his webinar. It's really good, and that's how I learned how to do all of this. So he talks about this data critique and modification process, and it's defining objectives, identify data requirements, critique, modify, analyze, and move back and forth between all of these things until you get what you want in the end. And before I get into the kind of technicalities of how we did it, I stole this slide from Persephone Whelan, who's the West Zone Fire Management Officer at Huron-Manistee. We gave a workshop a couple weeks ago in Michigan on this work, and she gave kind of the more fire management officer point of view, which I'm sure most of you resonate with instead of my GIS background. But she stressed that you need to know, why are you doing this, what do you want? Also understand that this is a landscape level approach with broad brush strokes of data, and you're looking at the big picture. So again, not zooming into one pixel and saying that's incorrect right there, but looking at the whole forest as a whole, and general trends. For how can they be successful, they had a lot of data from their prescribed fires that they could add to the disturbance data set, data from wildfires. They also had data from all of their mechanical treatments, which they added in. And for people, this was interesting. So there's a lot of people that need to be involved in this. So there's the person that's running the LANDFIRE Total Fuels Change tool with the GIS thing all going. There's the people that can ground speak and know the history of the area that you're working with. And then there's also an interpreter between those people who is somewhat familiar with the fire behavior in the region and somewhat familiar with the tool and how it works. And time, Persephone said she's been part of 3 fuel calibrations, and all of them were 5 days long from 8 to 12 hours a day. So this isn't for the weary. If you really want to get this done in your area, it takes a lot of time and people. And she also noted that part of the reason it took so long was because there's really no real right or wrong fuel model. And they debated that all day, every day, until they finally could choose one. But it depends on, again, why are you doing this, what do you want? Gets back to that question. So for the critique and modification steps, I'm just going to say briefly what they did and then go into some detail on a few of them. So the first step was to update their disturbance grid. They were doing this work in 2012, and the most recent LANDFIRE was 2008. So they had to add in all of their disturbances since 2008, and I'll show you that in a second. They also updated the canopy cover based on disturbance. And then they critiqued the fire behavior fuel model mapping rules and made modifications where needed based on local expertise, like we talked about, and I'll go through it even more. And then while they were doing this, they were conducting the preliminary fire behavior modeling to evaluate data modifications, and then if that didn't look right, then they went back to the critique, just like kind of Don's schematic of this iterative process. So I just wanted to show their edited disturbance map. So on the left we have the LANDFIRE 2008 fuel disturbance map, and on the right we have their updated map. And actually they look pretty similar, and I think this is because their forest is really good at submitting their disturbance data to LANDFIRE. So the only things they really needed to change was adding in their newer disturbances, where there's some there, some down there. And so when they worked on this disturbance grid, then that was a new input that went into the total fuels change tool to set their fuel model rules. So this is the output. I'm kind of going backwards and looking at what was the result and then jumping into a couple examples of how that worked. So on the left, this is their management area. The fuel model is based on the map zone 51 rules, and luckily their whole area is within one map zone, so they didn't have to take some rules from one zone versus another. And on the right, this is their output after their whole critique. This is their new map of their fire behavior fuel models. And there's a few really noticeable differences, and that's kind of what I focused on since I was looking at this kind of backwards. So you'll see that a lot of this yellowish sandy color turned pink here, and that's a change from grass model 3 to grass shrub 2. And I'll go into why that was in a minute. There's also a change from GS3 to TL2, which was, I can't see all the things now, but I think it was that this orange and this green turned more to TL2, which is this aqua. So that's why there's more aqua color all around here. Also, so this legend is only showing the fuel models that are in this area, and two models completely dropped out. They don't show up in the new map, and 2 models showed up that were not in the previous map. So that largest change where you saw the yellow to pink pixels was that grass 3 model and shrub 2 model. And the way that they made this decision was by looking at fire behavior. So this is flame length and rate of spread for GR3 and GS2, which are denoted by 103 and 122, I think. And so you can do this right in the tool in ArcGIS, but there's other ways to do it, and Persephone was working with an Excel tool called Compare5. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but I have it if you're interested, for making these types of graphs and then looking at them and some of their burn data and saying which one of these makes more sense in this existing vegetation type, the Laurentian pine barrens. And they decided that, so this was the original rule set. It was for Laurentian pine barrens, for any range of cover height, for any biophysical setting, we're going to assign a GR3. So everything in that type was a GR3. And then what they did was they edited this cover to, they said 10 to 39% cover should stay with GR3, but we want to change the areas with higher cover to GS2. And then you can actually see over here what percent of the existing vegetation type was or is in each of those categories. And so now there's 83% of this EDT basically changed to GS2. And then the other large one was Laurentian-OAK northern hardwoods, grass shrub 3 to timber litter 2. So this was the original rule set, and as you can see, basically the top 2 rows were the rules that applied to almost all the pixels, but then these ones down here specified a specific biophysical setting, which is not extremely common. I think it's more common in the lake states that they actually use a biophysical setting, but anyway, so they had all these different fuel models just based on different historical vegetation. And after looking at the Compare 5 tool, we're looking at flame lengths and looking at GR5, GR3, CL2, SH2. They decided that SH2 and TL2 described the fire behavior they were seeing across their landscape, and they didn't need any of the specific BPS rules. And then one to get just a little more complicated. So the ones we were just looking at were in undisturbed areas. So this is one in a disturbed area. So it's Laurentian-OAK pine barrens, moderate severity mechanical removal 6 to 10 years ago. Say that fast. So that's denoted here by this 323 number. So again, there's just this drop-down menu. You can pick any of the EVTs with its disturbance and see what the rule sets are. And so this one was set to GRASS 3 model for all combinations of the other data sets. But after looking again at the Compare 5 tool and their burn data, they decided that they were going to change the base rules to GS4 instead of GR3. And then, this gets a little more complicated and I won't go much into it today, but you can also add another raster layer that you want to be part of your rule set definitions, and that's called a wildcard. And so they inserted a wildcard. It was based on the type of disturbance and how their disturbance might respond differently than what LANDFIRE puts in for a disturbance factor. So they just noted those there and assigned those ones to different models. It was a GR2 and a GR3. So this is my last slide. So everything that I just told you is can be done with a week, with lots of people, GIS people, ArcGIS running. But there's this new tool, well it's not new, it's revamped, called the Interagency Fuel Treatment Decision Support System, which allows you to do all of this online. And it's really slick and really simple, and I think it is really powerful. So you go to this website and you create a landscape, which is basically creating a landscape file. You just get the LANDFIRE data, whichever year you want, do whichever fuel models you want, do a few clicks, and you have a landscape file. And then there's a whole interface for editing the fuel rules, for editing your landscape. And then right after you do this, you can run Flam Map immediately. So it really allows you to, this all happens in minutes, and I think it's really, really powerful. So definitely look into this. There's lots of videos online. I'll be posting one soon too. But I will stop now that I'm over time. So thank you, and does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Megan, how are you integrating fire occurrence?
It goes into the disturbance data set. And so disturbance is one of the factors that goes into determining the fuel model. So a set of experts decides, based on what type of disturbance you have, what the resulting fuel model will be from that type of disturbance.
So the end product here is really defining one of the established fuel models.
Mm-hmm. And you can use disturbance in different ways, but just in terms of this talk and this application, that's what it's used for.
But is there an application of the occurrence, just that there is an occurrence in that area that addresses that there's flammability issues with that particular area? In other words, we had a fire in an area, so that means that similar area should expect to see similar fires. Is that showing up in how a fuel model, well, it wouldn't show up for the fuel model, but then the fuel model may not be properly rated from a expert point of view, so they wouldn't have any idea what fire occurred.
Yeah, they're not really taking that into account here. It depends on the expert sitting in the room and what they decided to, yeah. I mean, because the disturbances, it has type, it would say it's fire, and it has a severity. And so that, has a rule set that assigns a certain fuel model to be what is the result after that disturbance.
Right, but then that's getting applied, that's not getting applied across the landscape, and that you had a disturbance, so in theory, you lost most of your fuel because of the disturbance or the wildfire, but that's not getting translated over to that original fuel type. It's still out there with the potential of burning like that. I don't see that coming as end results here too.
No, that's not included. It's just, this is all about what's on the ground in this location and what's happening there. And it doesn't learn from some locations and extrapolate that to other places.